Now, we've been in this series through the life of Elisha, and we are continuing on. We're about halfway through it right now. And as we've been looking at that, we're going to be looking at 2 Kings chapter 5 today. So if you got a Bible, you can turn there as we prepare to dig into that. But as we think about that, what I want you to also be thinking about is who we are as a church. And who we are as a church is, in the Greek word, is an ecclesia. And that idea of an ecclesia is something that is a gathering. You come together to go out. You come together to hear a directive from here. And as you hear this directive from God's word, then we go out and we're a movement. And that's what we are meant to be. And one of the things that I've seen, unfortunately, in my own life, and then obviously in others too, is that when we cease to be a movement, we get a little stale in our faith, and there's reasons for that. And maybe that's how you feel right now. Maybe you're feeling a little stale. Maybe there's a lack of peace in your life. And what I want to talk to us today is, like, how do we re-engage that idea that we're a movement, that we're meant to go global in a way, that this message is supposed to go throughout the world, and it's supposed to engage people that we may not even think it should engage. Maybe it'll even engage people that we might consider enemies of ours. That's what we're going to find in the text, is that God is actually working in the lives of people that are not just in Israel. And that was something that was very difficult for the people in ancient times to understand and accept. And that's actually something that we even see in Jesus' time that was difficult for people to accept and embrace. And in fact, there's one story in Luke chapter 4 in which Jesus is in Nazareth, and he says to the people there, and he's going to make them incredibly angry to the point of wanting to kill him. He says, "Truly I tell you, no prophet's accepted in his hometown." And I think almost all of us can probably relate to that. That the people that you grow up with, or the people that you've been around for quite a while, it's hard for them to see you differently than you were, maybe not as much as who you are. And so the people in Nazareth are having a tough time accepting Jesus. And he says, "I assure you, that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to the widow of Zarephath in the region of Sidon. He was sent outside of Israel. He was sent to an enemy of theirs." And then he goes on, "And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." And these people were performing raids on the people of Israel in this time. This was one of the greatest enemies that they had. And God is working in his life and in his heart. And what I'm getting at is when we're that ecclesia, you start to see the gospel in our modern day go into these different parts of the world that you don't necessarily expect it to. And then even go into our own life. So it's not just global, it's personal. And that, in a way, is what I want to talk to you about today. Because as we allow God, we experience God in new and profound ways, then we become more of that ecclesia that goes into the world to make such a difference. But those barriers that are in our lives, that we're going to see in Naaman's life, those barriers have to come down in order for that to happen, in order to experience him in that new and that profound way. And it's that's going to bring us into 2 Kings chapter 5. And we'll begin reading there in verse 1. And we're going to look at these barriers to others and you drawing close to God, and how we tear them down. Now, Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. So he had a significant title with the people that he was commanding, that he was leading. You might say he was a director, or he was a vice president, or he was a CEO, or he's an owner of a company. He has a very prominent position in this kingdom that he's a part of. So he's a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded. So he was not just looked on and viewed as being successful by people below him. He was viewed as somebody that was incredibly successful, even by the person that was above him. I mean, this guy has it going on. Because through him, then it goes on, the Lord had given victory to Aram. And so here's this enemy of Israel, who's supposed to be God's people, but they've so turned from him that now God is still working in Israel, but he's working in the lives of these people that are even enemies. And what that tells us is that our earthly kingdoms God is less concerned about them, and he's more concerned about his kingdom. And so God has given him victory. He was a valiant soldier. So he's successful. He's got a great title. He's probably got some wealth. And he's brave. He's courageous. But he had leprosy, which was a dreaded disease. And if you contracted it, you were certainly in ancient times to die. And so what I want to hone in on there, first of all, is that what's going to push Naaman to God, ultimately, is going to be his leprosy. But the thing that was holding him back was, we'll say it this way, the prosperity that he had experienced in life, the success that he had experienced in life, the title that he experienced in life. And that really can truly be a barrier for all of us, because we can be easily tricked into believing that the title, that the wealth, that the things are truly going to be enough for us. We can be tricked into actually trusting in those things. We can get so tricked into it. It's like what Jesus told us. We can get so tricked into it that we don't think we need God until something drives us to him. That's why Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 19. He said, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven." I was just reading this morning, I was reading this little article about a wife of one of the sheiks in Saudi Arabia. She has a $250,000 budget a month. A month. Now, here's the thing. Like, when you have that kind of wealth, you're just going to have all the luxuries. You're going to have everything that you can want to eat. You're going to have all the nice, anything you want, you can get it. There's nothing that's going to be withheld from you in this world. And you can imagine, and I'm not judging. I mean, you can maybe a little, but you can imagine though that when you have that kind of wealth, you can be tricked into just trusting in it. And Jesus says it's hard for the rich of the kingdom of heaven because they've got so many things that they can trust in. He said, again, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And that seems almost presumptuous of Jesus that he would say such a thing. But the truth is that is the truth. And he would correct his disciples who were beginning to drift into that. In Luke chapter 10, he sends out 72 of them. They go out to do ministry for him. Very successful ministry trip. But he doesn't want them to get caught up in their successes, in their notoriety. And so he says to them, they say to him, first of all, with their report, "Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name." In other words, everything you've asked us to do is worked out. We are so successful. So you can imagine what that would be like for you. It's, you got the big deal. You've got some great residuals coming in. You got some good passive income. You got a good health report. Your marriage is good. Your kids are making passing grades. Everything's going well. Jesus, thank you so much. And he says, "I know you think it's a big deal, but I saw Satan fall down from heaven." Okay? It's like, all right. Let me just one-up you on this one. I saw Satan get cast down, okay? So don't think you're that big of a deal. And then he goes on, and oh yeah, by the way, the only reason you can do anything is because of me. I have given you authority. I know so he's kind of putting them back into place. First of all, I've seen greater things than what you've seen. Secondly, you can't do anything apart from me. I've given you authority to trample on snakes, scorpions, overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, this is really the only thing that matters. Do not rejoice in your successes. Do not rejoice in spirits submitting to you. Don't rejoice in the cell, in the good health report, in the kids being in a good place now. Rejoice in the fact that your name is written in heaven. Because even if you have a $250,000 a month budget, there's a point when you're laying in a bed and the doctors have done all they can do. And your family is there, you're coherent, and in that moment, they are realizing, and you are too, that there's some goodbyes that are getting ready to happen. At the very least, hopefully there's a see you later, but it's going to be an end of this life. What is going to matter in that moment? Is it going to be the cell? Is it going to be that good health report that obviously didn't hold out? Is it going to be those great report cards? All those things matter in their time. Tim Keller was a pastor who passed away a couple years ago. He's a man who sold millions of books. He's known by millions of people. And every one of those books has his name on it. And he said at the end, before he passed, he said, the thing that gives me peace and comfort as he was getting ready to pass away from pancreatic cancer, he said, is that my name is written in the book of life. And what Jesus was pushing these disciples towards, and he's pushing us towards, is not to get caught up in this trick of trusting in our prosperity and the fact that we've won battles and people think a lot of you and you're highly regarded. Even the master thinks you're something special. Like Naaman, he's saying, don't get caught up in that. Because inevitably, the thing that's going to give you peace and comfort isn't going to be that prosperity. It's going to be the fact that your name is written in a book of life. And we have to allow that barrier in our hearts to be broken down, to not trust in those things that we have that tendency to trust in and to only trust in Him. Because, well, we all have a little sort of a spiritual leprosy, if nothing else. And Naaman realizes it. And when he realizes it, he doesn't know what to do. So the text goes on. So Naaman was this commander, very valiant, but he has leprosy. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. Okay, does that sound at all familiar? A couple years ago, right? Hamas comes into Israel, October 7th. They take over 1,000 people captive. These hostages are held. They're blindfolded. They're taken into tunnels. They're not treated all that great. It's the different geopolitical things are going on. And you can imagine if somebody's in that position and one of these captors has an issue, is that person that's held captive going to be nice to them? They've got a health condition and the person that's a captor is going to help them? That just kind of give you some modern context. That's what this young girl situation is. She is held captive against her will. So she served Naaman's wife, and she said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of leprosy. And what I want to get at here isn't so much the person receiving this word. It's the person that has the word. Because this young girl was held captive against her will. She was treated, she's a slave, okay? And in this particular position that she is in, she has a choice. Is she going to forgive and be kind, or is she going to keep the only hope that this man has to herself? Now he doesn't know. Naaman doesn't know where hope can be found. He doesn't know where the cure to leprosy is going to really, if it's even out there. He doesn't think it is. But she knows it is. And all that she has to do is tell him. The second barrier in our world today isn't in our hearts. It's the fact, it's not in other people's hearts, it's in our hearts that have this message, the good news. It's our prejudice. And by prejudice, I mean it's an unwillingness of ours to help somebody else because of some preconceived notion. We think they'll reject us, we think they'll ridicule us, and we don't want to help them. We don't want to be kind to them, maybe even because they've been mean to us. I hope you're tracking with me. She doesn't have to say that there is hope out there for him. She could have just kept the news to herself, but in that moment, she decides to be kind, and that barrier in her heart is torn down. And because it's torn down, she can share the good news with him. Proverbs 19, verse 11 says, it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. It's kind of like a neighbor I had many years ago. We don't live there anymore, and neither does she, but we had this neighbor years ago, and she always would park in front of my house too close to the driveway. It was always like, first of all, she didn't have to park in front of my house. She had her house to park in front of, but she wanted to park in front of my house. And then she had a Tesla, which, I don't want to hit a Tesla. And she's way too close to my driveway. And so eventually I just got annoyed and I go over there and I talk to her. I'm like, hey, can you park in front of your house or in your driveway instead of making me park down the street and then I have to walk back? And anyway, and we had this conversation. So we get a little snippy at each other. And in the end, we were actually both a little embarrassed. It wasn't too mean, but it wasn't nice either. So then there's this tension for like 7-8 months. And then I'm out one day. And she's a little older. I didn't realize it, but she was actually in her 70s. And she never pulled her weeds. So then I'm on my side of the property spraying weeds. And I had this thing. I'm like, in my heart, I'm thinking, all right, I need to look past the car situation. And I need to spray her weeds. I need to help her with her weeds too. And so then I did that. And I didn't realize it, but she was watching me the whole time, judging me probably, but at any rate. So she's watching me, and then she sees me start to spray her weeds, and in that moment of kindness, I finally relented and did what I was supposed to do. But it was in that moment, after that, everything got better. After that, I was able to, I invited her to church, talked to her about what I do. She was very cordial. There was an opportunity there, but I had to be willing to look past some petty little thing in order to get to that place. And the Bible tells us that we need to do that, for those of you that believe in Jesus, that we need to be willing to be kind and set aside those prejudices and to be loving to the people that have hurt us and to not hold on to slights. I was talking to a friend of mine just this last week, and we were saying to each other, there are things that happen to us, and not necessarily overly traumatic things, but things that have happened to us 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and we still get aggravated by those slights, him and I both. We have our things. And we're both saying to ourselves, we got to let some of that stuff go. We can't live with those things. That's not a way to live. You can't be motivated by somebody's, some thing where they have overlooked you or cut you down. And when we do that, though, it leads us to do what we were supposed to do the right thing. James says it this way, James chapter 4, that if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. And the point is that barrier comes down in our hearts when we're willing to be kind to others, and then the gospel can be shared. And that's what I really want to get at, is Naaman would have never known about Elisha if the girl wasn't willing to tell Naaman about him. No one will ever know about Jesus and how he's changed your life if you're unwilling to tell them. That's why the disciples, when they were before the Sanhedrin, said to them, we cannot help but tell people what we have seen and what we have heard and how Jesus has changed our life. Because if we don't tell them, they will never know. No one can know that God, they can come up with some ideas that maybe God's good or there's a good place after this life, but they'll never know that God sent his one and only good son, his only son to die for them unless somebody tells them. That's why Romans 10 tells us, Romans 10 says that, if I can find it in my notes. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? How can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And I would just say for us is that there are people in this world that aren't coming to the Lord because there's too many of us unwilling to share the good news. And this young girl tells Naaman about Elisha. And Naaman then went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go. And the king of Aram replied, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of clothing. And why would he take all those things? Because he doesn't understand. He thinks he has to buy God's blessing. This world is just full of people. Even churches are full of people. We don't understand how God exactly works. And we need people to come alongside us and guide us. And so he's bringing all this money and these clothes because he thinks he's going to have to buy his hope. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read this way. He doesn't even know where he's going. He's not going to Elisha. He goes to the king. He assumes it's the king that's going to help him. With this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read this, He didn't send him to Elisha. You know why he didn't send him to Elisha? Because he stopped worshiping Yahweh a long time ago. He had turned away from God. He doesn't even know where hope is. Isn't that sad? That these are the people of God, but this is why God ventures out into, this is why God's at work all over the world, because even the people who are at the center. You think about this. It starts in Jerusalem, Christianity, goes to basically Rome, out throughout Europe, to America. Wouldn't it be unbelievable if you start this idea that maybe God was giving people victory in China or in like a Muslim nation? But the reality is that God is at work in those places. God is in those places. And if we aren't careful, we get so comfortable and caught up in all of our blessings that we stop trusting in Him. And then when somebody comes to us looking for hope, when they're sick, looking for hope, when they're worried about what happens when they die, we don't know what to do. We can let that happen to us if we're not leaning into Him the way that we need to. The king of Israel doesn't even know what to do. He tears his clothes. Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me? The king is lost. But Elisha finds out. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he either hears from a messenger or a servant or he hears from God. At any rich way, he finds out. So he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robe? In other words, why did you not just point him to me? Why do you think everything depends on you? Have the man come to me, so that he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Did you see that Naaman, it doesn't even speak of him coming off of the horse. He just pulls up, and then Elisha doesn't go out to him. So he's teaching Naaman a lesson in humility. And he's going to have to go into the water 7 times. And that 7 times is pushing him to have faith. That what he's doing, there's a level of obedience and there's a level of belief that he's going to have to operate with. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out and come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot, cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? And so he turned and went off in a rage. There's 2 things going on there. First of all, he's incredibly proud. And Elisha's trying to humble him. Everybody has sung his praises all his life. And it didn't mean anything when he ended up with leprosy. And what Elisha's doing is what a particular priest that I heard about from ancient times, from the Crusades did. He had a church that was it was smaller. And what would happen in these crusades is knights would come through the churches. They would literally just ride their horses through these. I don't know exactly sure what the setup was, but they would ride through the churches, or they would ride through these these holy grounds, and they would be blessed as they would go off to battle. Well, this one priest said, "You have to come into my church in order to be that blessed." But the knights couldn't come through on their horses. The doorway was too small. And so the priest made the knight get off of their high horse, come into the church and humble themselves to receive that blessing. In a way, this is what Elisha is doing to Naaman. It's like, you got to get off that high horse and humble yourself before God. Because, and this is the second thing, and this is the third barrier, you are presuming on how God should act. Isn't that one of our worst qualities? That we presume on what it is that God should do for us and how it is that God should act. And we say, well, we should be married by this particular age, and we should have kids by this age, and we should have this kind of a title and this type of wealth. all by these certain periods of point in time in our life, and these are the way that God should act in other people's lives, and if he doesn't do that, then maybe he's not there. And what Naaman is being taught here is that God has a plan so much greater than what you could ever imagine. He could do more than you could ever think or ask or imagine, right? But Naaman has a barrier of presumption that has to get torn down. And so do we. And when that presumption on God can get torn down, then we can experience him in new and incredible ways. And the text goes on. And so Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you to wash and be cleansed?" I mean, if God told us to do something great, wouldn't we do it? Probably. But what if he just said, "Why don't you take 15 minutes and read this letter I wrote you? Why don't you just take 15 minutes and do just these few things? Tell me that you're thankful. Petition me for some things in your life, and then just repent and ask for forgiveness of whatever it is you need to ask for." Well, what if he just said, "Hey, I just want you to go and gather together once a week for about an hour, sing a few songs. Why don't you just do that?" See, that's our problem, though. We're looking for something great. We're looking for this incredible experience. And he's saying, no, it's way more simple than that. Tear down this presumptive wall that you have. Just do these simple things, and you're going to experience me in ways that you could never imagine. So he, Naaman, went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. I mean, what if God just said, "Hey, just go to church. Like, I know you want to do this great thing to have your marriage to work out and for you to have peace in your life and you have a clear mind. But what if he just said, you know what, just go to church. Like for an hour a week. That's all you got to do. Think about all the other things you spend all these other hours wasting time on that I waste time on. But he just said that. Just do that. It's almost too simple. But then he does it and he's cleansed. And then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and he said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel, so please accept the gift from your servant." And the prophet said, No. "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing, because I didn't do it." And even though Naaman insisted, he refused Elisha. And then Naaman says, "If you will not, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other God but the Lord." Because in Naaman's mind, like so many of ours, we think that God is isolated, and so he's got to bring the dirt with him. And the truth is that God's in all these different places. We just don't always let him have access to us the way that we ought. So his theology is still growing. Elisha doesn't even correct him. He's probably saying to himself, "You'll figure it out." And then he says this, all the barriers are down. He says, "So now go in peace." And I think that may be what God is wanting for you and for me and all of us is we would just stop depending on our prosperity. Like, what makes you more nervous? Just know where you're at with that one. What makes you more nervous? If I were to say, "Hey, there is no God," or if I were to say to you, "Hey, there's no money in your bank account," right? I've asked you that before. I think it's a good question to ask ourselves. Like, that kind of lets us know what we're trusting in. If we got these prejudices, like what if you were to be kind and forgive, and I were to be kind and forgive, and we were to share this gospel with other people, maybe God would show up some ways there that we can't even imagine. And then ultimately, we can't be presumptuous on God. You never know what he'll do. You don't know exactly how he's going to work. I don't either. His ways are not our ways. But I do know that his way will give us peace. And so when Elisha looks at Naaman, he says, "I know you don't understand all this. I know you haven't figured it all out, but that's okay. This is the path that peace will be found in. So go in peace." I'm going to have a word of prayer for us, and our team's going to sing lead us in worship for one more song. Father, we just come for you, and I pray, Lord, these barriers in our hearts would be broken down for others and ourselves to experience you. Help us to trust in you more, to accept the mystery of your will more. Father, to forgive and to be kind as we ought. And Lord, to experience this peace that goes beyond understanding in ways that only you can give it to us. And so we thank you for Christ, and we give you all this in his name.